Imagine a young boy growing up in the bustling city of Tarsus, a place where cultures collided and ideas from Greece, Rome, and the Jewish world mingled freely. This boy, Bornus, was surrounded by the richness of knowledge and diversity. Yet his heart and upbringing were deeply rooted in the traditions of his devout Jewish family. From an early age, Saul displayed a sharp mind and a passionate dedication to learning. His family, recognizing his potential, ensured he received the finest education available, preparing him for a life of commitment, discipline, and purpose. As Saul matured, he was sent to Jerusalem, the spiritual heart of his people, to study under the renowned teacher Gamaliel. Here, among scholars and sacred texts, he absorbed the laws, customs, and deep wisdom of Judaism. He became a Pharisee, a group known for strict adherence to the law, and quickly distinguished himself with unmatched zeal and dedication. Saul's early life was one of structure, knowledge, and unwavering devotion, a foundation that would later shape the remarkable journey of transformation he was about to experience. Yet, Saul's story is not just about education and devotion. It is about the collision of conviction and revelation. He lived in a world where religious beliefs were intensely personal and deeply protected. As he grew more fervent in his faith, he perceived a new movement, followers of Jesus, as a threat to everything he held sacred. The tension between Saul's rigid devotion and the emerging Christian community set the stage for a profound turning point, a moment that would alter not only his life but the course of history itself. In this story, we will journey alongside Saul as he navigates faith, purpose, and a calling that challenges everything he once knew. We will witness his transformation from a man determined to suppress a new faith into Paul, one of the most influential leaders and missionaries in Christian history. Through triumphs, struggles, miracles, and unwavering dedication, his life becomes a testament to the power of belief, the courage to change, and the enduring impact of a single individual committed to a higher purpose. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary journey, do not forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapters of Paul's incredible story. Join us as we explore the life, challenges, and triumphs of a man whose journey from Saul to Paul continues to inspire millions around the world today. As Saul left the familiar streets of Tarsus behind, he entered Jerusalem, a city that pulsed with the weight of history, faith, and debate, a city where every stone seemed to whisper the stories of generations long past. Here, in the shadow of the temple, he began the next chapter of his life under the guidance of Gamaliel, a teacher renowned not only for his wisdom, but for his ability to inspire even the most diligent minds to pursue understanding with both rigor and reflection. Saul was eager, perhaps more eager than any other student, to immerse himself completely in the study of the law, the sacred texts that formed the backbone of his people's faith, the instructions that had guided his ancestors through centuries of trials and triumphs. Each day, as he listened to Gamaliel's lessons, Saul absorbed not only the knowledge of the Torah, but also the principles that lay beneath every commandment, learning to discern the subtle patterns of justice, devotion, and righteousness embedded within the texts. The scrolls, with their carefully inscribed letters and layers of interpretation, became a landscape in which his mind wandered and his heart sharpened, as though each law were a stepping stone on a path toward both understanding and responsibility. Under Gamaliel's mentorship, Saul was introduced to a discipline of thought that demanded meticulous attention, critical reasoning, and a deep respect for tradition. The Pharisees, the group with which Saul increasingly identified, were themselves committed to an exacting observance of the law, believing that even the smallest actions carried moral and spiritual significance. To Saul, this was not a constraint but a calling, a way to demonstrate devotion and to live a life aligned with the divine order he so deeply revered. He studied the minutiae of ritual, the ethical intricacies of daily conduct, and the historical precedents that had guided the Jewish people through centuries of displacement, persecution, and survival. In this intense environment, Saul's mind became sharp, precise, and unyielding, his sense of duty profound, and his commitment unwavering. He was no ordinary student. He pursued mastery not for status or recognition, but because the law itself demanded respect, reflection, and a life devoted to its principles. Yet, Saul's education was about more than memorizing rules or understanding texts. It was about cultivating a worldview in which order, justice, and fidelity to God were inseparable from identity and purpose. Every discussion, every argument, and every lesson with Gamaliel sharpened his understanding of what it meant to live as a Jew devoted to the covenant. He observed the debates among scholars, noting the subtleties in interpretation, the balance between mercy and rigor, and the tension between tradition and innovation. These experiences did more than teach him law. They shaped his character, honed his intellect, and instilled in him a sense of responsibility that extended beyond personal piety to the broader community. Saul began to see himself not merely as a student but as a guardian of his faith, a young man who could uphold, defend, and interpret the traditions of his people with a clarity and precision that few could match. As Saul's identity as a Pharisee solidified, so did his perception of the world around him. The teachings and practices he embraced were not abstract ideals. They were living, breathing guidelines that informed his interactions, his judgments, and his sense of purpose. He learned to navigate the complexities of human behavior through the lens of law, to weigh the moral consequences of action, and to recognize the spiritual dimensions of everyday life. His commitment to the Pharisaic way was both intellectual and emotional, an integration of mind, heart, and spirit that set him apart from his peers and instilled in him a confidence that bordered on zealotry. To question the law, to challenge the interpretations he had worked so hard to internalize, seemed unthinkable. For the law was more than rules, it was a reflection of divine order itself. And to uphold it was to participate in a sacred continuity stretching back through generations. It was within this context that Saul first encountered stories of the followers of the way, the early Christians who proclaimed that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah. To Saul, their teachings were not merely wrong, they were dangerous, a challenge to the carefully constructed order that he had dedicated his life to mastering and preserving. His training under Gamaliel, his deep immersion in the law, and his identity as a Pharisee all converged to make him a vigilant defender of tradition, someone who would not stand idly by while beliefs he considered heretical spread among his people. And yet, even as his mind plotted to suppress what he saw as error, the foundations laid in Jerusalem discipline, reflection, and a capacity for profound learning would later enable him to understand, reinterpret, and eventually embrace a vision far beyond what he could have imagined in his youth. Saul's years under Gamaliel were formative not only because they trained him to understand and enforce the law, because they instilled in him the intellectual rigor, moral seriousness, and capacity for deep reflection that would later allow him to become Paul. Every argument he engaged in, every scroll he studied, and every lesson he absorbed contributed to a mind capable of navigating the complex interplay between tradition and revelation, law and grace, human expectation and divine calling. These experiences prepared him for challenges that no student of law could foresee, equipping him with the insight, resilience, an analytical skill that would later make his teachings resonate across cultures. generations, and continents. Through the years in Jerusalem, Saul's devotion, intelligence, and zeal forged a man who could think deeply, act decisively, and confront the world with both courage and conviction, a foundation upon which his extraordinary transformation and the remarkable story of Paul, the apostle, would ultimately be built. Saul's dedication to the law and his identity as a Pharisee, forged in the classrooms of Jerusalem under Gamaliel, shaped a man who saw the world through the lens of divine order, where obedience to the law was not merely a duty but the very measure of faithfulness. Yet, this unwavering devotion came with a dangerous intensity, for Saul could not tolerate what he perceived as deviation. What he believed threatened the sacred covenant that had guided his people for centuries. The whispers of a new movement, followers of the way, reached him with stories of a man named Jesus who had been crucified yet whose followers claimed resurrection and divine authority. And to Saul, these claims were a challenge to everything he had spent his life mastering, a challenge that demanded a response both decisive and unyielding. His resolve crystallized most tragically in the stoning of Stephen, a young leader whose courage and eloquence in defending his faith had drawn the attention of the Jewish authorities. Saul was present that day, standing among those who condemned Stephen, observing the scene with a resolve fueled by what he believed was righteousness. He held the garments of the men who executed the act, a silent but potent gesture of approval, and in that moment, he was more than a witness, he was complicit, actively participating in the enforcement of the law as he understood it. To Saul, Stephen's words and convictions were dangerous blasphemies, not mere dissent, and the act of stoning was not cruelty in his mind but a necessary defense of tradition, an assertion that the law must be preserved at all costs, even at the expense of human life. Saul's zeal did not end with Stephen. It expanded into a calculated campaign to suppress the nascent Christian movement wherever it appeared. From house to house, city to city, he pursued those who followed the teachings of Jesus with relentless determination, believing that in doing so he was protecting the purity of his faith and safeguarding the spiritual future of his people. The intensity of his persecution was not random or impulsive. It was the product of years of study, reflection, and identification with the Pharisaic ideal of strict adherence to divine law. Every arrest, every imprisonment, and every effort to dismantle the fledgling communities was executed with precision, a demonstration of both his strategic mind and his unwavering commitment to what he understood as justice. In his pursuit, Saul sought and received authorization from the highest religious authorities in Jerusalem, letters of commission that empowered him to travel to distant cities such as Damascus to identify, apprehend, and return those who followed the way. The scope of his campaign reflected both his ambition and his belief that deviation from the law could not be tolerated, that faithfulness to God required action even in the face of resistance, danger, or moral questioning. To him, the threat was existential. The new movement challenged not only tradition but the very foundations of Jewish identity. And Saul, trained in the highest schools of thought and steeped in generations of legal and spiritual knowledge, became its fiercest enforcer. Yet within this fervor lay the seeds of transformation, for the intensity of his pursuit, the clarity of his mission, and the depth of his conviction would later become the very instruments through which he would embrace a higher calling. The same dedication that drove him to witness and approve Stephen's stoning, that propelled him to arrest and imprison followers of the way, would later be redirected, channeling the brilliance of his mind and the fire of his spirit towards spreading the very faith he once sought to destroy. The moment of witnessing Stephen, the moral certainty, and the unshakable belief in the necessity of his actions, all coalesced into a profound internal preparation for the encounter that would redefine his life. For it was from the depth of his conviction and the extremity of his actions that the dramatic interruption on the road to Damascus would gain its transformative power. The story of Saul's persecution is not merely a record of cruelty. It is a reflection of a man fully committed to the ideals he held sacred, a man whose understanding of faith, law, and righteousness was absolute, and whose actions, though devastating to others, were consistent with a worldview forged through rigorous education, disciplined practice, and unwavering adherence to tradition. It is this very intensity, this total immersion in belief and practice, that would make his later conversion and ministry so extraordinary. For the mind that once pursued destruction could, with revelation and insight, become the mind that pursued understanding, reconciliation, and the spread of a faith far beyond its origins. In every city Saul entered, in every house he sought to investigate, and in every act of enforcement, there was an underlying narrative of conviction turned to action, a narrative that would later mirror the magnitude of his transformation. The same streets where he once dragged men and women to imprisonment would later echo with his sermons and letters, teaching, guiding, and nurturing the very communities he once sought to dismantle. His persecution of the early Christians, culminating in the tragic episode of Stephen, was both a defining moment of his early life and a dramatic prelude to the life-altering encounter that awaited him. An encounter that would transform Saul into Paul and reshape the spiritual landscape of the world. Saul's story, in this phase, is a powerful testament to the intensity of belief, the consequences of zeal, and the unforeseen ways in which conviction can prepare a person for destiny. It is a story that challenges us to consider the complexities of human motivation, the intertwining of knowledge and action, and the extraordinary capacity for transformation that lies within even the most determined hearts. And as we follow Saul through these dark and turbulent years, witnessing both his devotion and his fervor, we begin to glimpse the profound arc of change that will carry him from enforcer to apostle, from persecutor to the most influential messenger of the faith he once sought to suppress. Saul's journey to Damascus began as a mission of conviction, a journey fueled by zeal and certainty, yet it would transform into a journey of revelation and destiny. The roads he traveled were dusty and sun-baked, stretching endlessly under a sky that seemed indifferent to the turmoil brewing in his heart. Saul, armed with letters from the high priest authorizing him to arrest followers of the way, moved with a determined purpose, his mind fixed on what he believed was a sacred duty. Each step carried the weight of law, tradition, and personal conviction, and with each passing mile, his anticipation grew for the confrontation that would, in his, uphold the honor of God and the integrity of his faith. He thought of the communities he would enter, the believers he would seize, and the authority he wielded with the confidence of years of study and preparation. To Saul, this mission was just, necessary, and righteous. He could not yet imagine that the very road on which he pressed forward would become the stage for a transformation beyond his comprehension. Then, in a moment that defies the ordinary, the world around him changed. A light, blinding and radiant, enveloped him, and a voice, commanding yet filled with gravity, spoke directly to his spirit. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" The words struck with a force that went beyond sound, reaching deep into the foundations of his beliefs, shaking the certainty of every lesson he had studied, every argument he had mastered, and every law he had defended. Saul asked, bewildered and trembling, "Who are you, Lord?" And the reply came with a clarity that transcended reason. "Whom you are persecuting." In that instant, the zeal that had guided him, the fervor that had fueled his relentless pursuit of the early Christians, collided with a reality so profound that it shattered every assumption, every certainty he had ever held. The encounter left Saul temporarily blind, a symbolic reflection of the inner illumination that had begun. The companions who walked with him were bewildered, hearing a voice yet seeing no one, and their confusion mirrored the upheaval that gripped Saul's own consciousness. For 3 days, he remained without sight, in a darkness that forced introspection, a silence that demanded reflection, and a stillness that allowed the magnitude of his calling to unfold. During this time, he neither ate nor drank, and in this state of physical deprivation and spiritual intensity, Saul confronted the truth that what he had pursued with fervent passion had been a path not toward justice, but toward misunderstanding, a path that now required surrender, humility, and transformation. Led by hand into the city of Damascus, Saul's arrival was not triumphant but tentative. A man whose power and certainty had been suspended, a man now vulnerable to revelation and rebirth. It was here that Ananias, sent by the Lord, approached him with courage and faith, declaring that Saul would regain his sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. The scales fell from Saul's eyes, both literally and metaphorically, revealing a world transformed, a vision unclouded, and a purpose renewed. He was baptized, nourished, and strengthened, emerging from these days of blindness with a heart and mind fundamentally altered. The man who had once carried letters of authority to imprison and punish now bore a mission of healing, teaching, and spreading the very faith he had sought to extinguish. This profound transformation did not occur in isolation. Saul's earlier life, the rigorous study under Gamaliel, the dedication to law, and the fervent enforcement of tradition, all contributed to the depth of his understanding, the clarity of his discernment, and the weight of his eventual ministry. His knowledge of Jewish law, his fluency in the language of culture and philosophy, and his disciplined mind became instruments through which the message of Christ could be articulated with precision, insight, and authority. The encounter on the road to Damascus was not merely a miraculous event. It was the pivot that redirected a life of conviction toward a destiny of service, compassion, and transformative influence. In the days and months that followed, Saul did not immediately seek the approval of the apostles in Jerusalem. Instead, he journeyed to Arabia and returned to Damascus, immersing himself in study, reflection, and the internalization of the revelation he had received. He grappled with questions of identity, belief, and purpose, synthesizing the lessons of his past with the demands of a calling that would extend far beyond the borders of his homeland. Each moment of solitude, each meditation on the scriptures, and each engagement with new understanding deepened his faith and prepared him for the challenges of a ministry that would span continents and cultures. Saul's transformation into Paul represents not only a change of name but a metamorphosis of perspective, purpose, and power. The man who had persecuted now preached. The mind that had studied the law to enforce it now interpreted it to illuminate grace. And the heart that had been hardened by zeal became open to compassion, understanding, and the universality of God's message. His encounter with Jesus on that dusty road was the fulcrum upon which the axis of his life turned, a moment that fused divine revelation with human intellect, spiritual awakening with practical purpose, and personal redemption with a calling that would echo through history. This episode demonstrates the profound capacity for change that lies within the human soul when confronted with truth, courage, and divine intervention. Saul's blindness became vision, his fervor became mission, and his life trajectory shifted from destruction to creation, from persecution to proclamation, from adherence to tradition to the embodiment of a faith that embraces all people. The road to Damascus, a path he had once traveled with certainty in his heart and authority in his hand, became a symbol of transformation, illustrating how conviction, encounter, and revelation can converge to redirect a life and, ultimately, alter the course of history itself. In reflecting on this pivotal moment, one sees the emergence of Paul, a man whose intellectual rigor, disciplined mind, and spiritual awakening would enable him to become one of the most influential leaders of early Christianity. A messenger whose life embodies the power of divine encounter, the necessity of reflection, and the extraordinary potential for transformation inherent in every individual who opens themselves to truth. After his dramatic encounter on the road to Damascus, the man once known as Saul emerged into the world transformed, yet his journey was far from complete. Though his sight had been restored and his spirit invigorated, he was acutely aware that the road ahead would demand patience, discernment, and courage. The revelation he had received was powerful, but the understanding of how to live and act upon it required reflection, study, and immersion in the very communities he had once sought to destroy. In this period, he withdrew from the immediate glare of Damascus streets and found solitude in Arabia, a land of deserts, mountains, and open horizons that offered the quiet and space necessary for contemplation and spiritual formation. There, away from the expectations and scrutiny of others, Paul could wrestle with the magnitude of what had occurred, explore the meaning of the message that had so radically overturned his worldview, and prepare himself for the immense responsibilities that awaited him. The precise nature of Paul's time in Arabia remains shrouded in mystery, leaving historians and scholars to speculate on the experiences that might have shaped him during those months or years. It is possible that he devoted himself entirely to study, prayer, and reflection, deepening his understanding of the Scriptures, interpreting their relevance in light of his encounter with Christ, and seeking ways to reconcile his Jewish heritage with the emerging Christian faith. Perhaps he encountered fellow believers in secret, learning to bridge the gap between the zeal of his past and the compassion required by his new calling. This time, removed from the public eye, allowed him to internalize the lessons of humility, obedience, and love, preparing a mind capable of teaching, reasoning, and guiding others with both authority and empathy. Arabia, in its vast and silent landscape, became a crucible for transformation, forging within Paul the resolve, insight, and patience that would later define his missionary journeys. After this period of reflection, Paul returned to Damascus, re-entering a city where he had once been a figure of fear and aggression. Now, however, he walked its streets with a renewed sense of purpose, carrying a message that challenged the very identity of the communities he had once hunted. The followers of the Way, aware of his past actions, were cautious, their initial reception marked by skepticism and fear. It is understandable that the disciples would hesitate, for the man who had persecuted them, who had approved of the stoning of Stephen and sought to imprison countless believers, had now returned proclaiming the same message he had once condemned. Trust, especially after betrayal, is not easily granted, and Paul's reputation preceded him, casting a long shadow over his words and intentions. Yet even amidst this mistrust, there were those who recognized the sincerity of his transformation, most notably Barnabas, whose courage, discernment, and faith in God allowed him to vouch for Paul to the apostles. Through Barnabas' support, Paul was gradually accepted, though always with cautious vigilance, and he began the delicate work of rebuilding relationships, establishing credibility, and demonstrating the depth of his commitment through action, patience, and integrity. This period in Damascus was crucial, not merely as a time of personal adjustment, but as a formative stage in the development of Paul's ministry. Here, he honed the ability to communicate complex spiritual truths with clarity and compassion, drawing upon his intimate knowledge of Jewish law, philosophy, and culture to connect with those who were both skeptical and sincere. The challenge of convincing former enemies and wary allies alike demanded more than knowledge. It required empathy, wisdom, and the capacity to meet people where they were, to acknowledge fears and doubts while offering a vision of hope, redemption, and purpose. It is in this delicate balance that Paul's early leadership skills began to emerge, shaped by the tension between his past zeal and his new calling, between his intellectual rigor and his spiritual insight, and between the skepticism of the community and the authenticity of his faith. Eventually, Paul's time in Damascus led him back to Jerusalem, the city where his earlier zeal had been most visible, where his presence had once inspired fear and outrage, and where the apostles themselves had reason to doubt the sincerity of his conversion. His arrival was fraught with tension, for the disciples remembered the persecutor who had caused them great suffering, and the memories of Stephen's martyrdom were still vivid. Yet Paul approached this moment with humility and patience, relying not on argument or force, but on the visible transformation of his life, the consistency of his faith, and the support of those who had witnessed his sincerity firsthand. Through dialogue, demonstration, and unwavering commitment, he gradually earned the trust of key figures, laying the foundation for collaboration, mentorship, and eventual partnership in spreading the gospel. The initial mistrust Paul faced in Jerusalem also served as an early test of the resilience and integrity of his calling. It forced him to navigate suspicion, opposition, and caution, developing a ministry style that combined bold proclamation with measured discernment, fervent conviction with relational sensitivity, and doctrinal clarity with practical compassion. These skills would become invaluable as he embarked on the larger missionary journeys that would define his legacy, enabling him to communicate effectively across cultures, negotiate conflict, and inspire communities that had every reason to doubt him. Each encounter, each conversation, and each act of patience and consistency became a building block, transforming mistrust into cooperation and skepticism into belief. In reflecting upon this period of Paul's life, one sees the intricate interplay between personal transformation, strategic patience, and relational intelligence. His time in Arabia and Damascus, followed by his careful reintegration into Jerusalem, illustrates that spiritual awakening alone is insufficient without deliberate reflection, preparation, and the ability to navigate human dynamics with grace. Paul's journey underscores the necessity of internalizing insight, building credibility, and exercising wisdom in the face of skepticism. And it foreshadows the remarkable impact he would achieve in cities and communities far beyond the confines of his early experiences. This stage in his life exemplifies the patient, deliberate cultivation of both character and ministry, revealing how a profound encounter with the divine can be translated into transformative leadership through reflection, perseverance, and trust building. Through these years of preparation, Paul transitioned from a figure of fear and opposition to a man of vision and influence, laying the groundwork for the missionary journeys that would not only expand Christianity geographically, but also intellectually, culturally, and spiritually, demonstrating that genuine transformation requires both inner renewal and the careful navigation of human relationships, a balance Paul mastered through patience, humility, and unwavering faith. With the foundation of his faith now solidified and the trust of key disciples earned, Paul embarked on the journeys that would define his life and shape the future of Christianity. Journeys that began with his partnership with Barnabas, a man of wisdom, courage, and unwavering faith who recognized the transformative power in Paul's story, and was willing to walk alongside him into the unknown. Together, they traversed the diverse landscapes of Asia Minor, a region alive with bustling cities, rural villages, and a tapestry of cultures that reflected the intersection of Greek, Roman, and local traditions. Each town they entered presented both opportunity and challenge, as communities varied in their openness to a new message and their willingness to embrace the radical ideas Paul and Barnabas carried. The pair navigated these spaces with a combination of strategic insight, heartfelt conviction, and the adaptability that comes from a life steeped in both intellectual rigor and spiritual awakening. In Antioch, the first significant stop on their missionary travels, Paul's preaching began to attract attention, drawing crowds into synagogues and open forums, and sparking curiosity as well as suspicion. He spoke with authority, weaving together his knowledge of Scripture, history, and philosophy with the transformative experience that had reshaped his life, challenging listeners to reconsider their assumptions about faith, God, and the human capacity for change. Many responded with eagerness, embracing the message and committing to a path that promised both spiritual depth and communal identity. Yet resistance was never far behind. Opposition arose from local leaders, jealous of the growing influence of these itinerant teachers, as well as from those wary of deviation from established traditions. Paul and Barnabas faced both verbal confrontation and physical threats, experiencing firsthand the tension that comes with innovation, conviction, and the call to challenge entrenched norms. Their travels carried them from the eastern provinces into the heart of the Greek world, cities where philosophy, art, and commerce flourished, and where ideas were debated with the fervor of public life. In Thessalonica, they encountered communities that welcomed their message, examining Scripture daily and engaging with Paul's teachings with curiosity and diligence. Yet the city also became a site of intense conflict as detractors stirred unrest, fearful of the social and cultural changes that the new faith might inspire. In response, Paul and Barnabas moved carefully, balancing bold proclamation with strategic prudence, knowing that the work of establishing churches required both courage and wisdom, persistence and patience, and a willingness to endure hardship without compromising the core truths of their mission. In Philippi, a significant turning point occurred when Paul met Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth whose openness to the gospel allowed her household to embrace the faith and become the first recorded European converts. This moment was emblematic of the broader pattern of Paul's ministry. Encounters with individuals whose lives, once transformed, became catalysts for wider community impact. The establishment of new churches was not merely an administrative task, but a deeply relational and spiritual endeavor, requiring Paul to teach, counsel, and guide fledgling believers, instilling in them both knowledge and resilience, nurturing their faith while preparing them to withstand the opposition that inevitably arose from those resistant to change. Every journey presented physical dangers and unpredictable challenges, from inciting riots stirred by those opposed to the growing Christian presence to narrowly escaping plots against his life. Yet Paul's resolve never wavered. In Athens, he engaged with philosophers and citizens at the Areopagus, demonstrating his ability to contextualize the gospel for diverse audiences. Bridging cultural, intellectual, and religious divides with clarity, persuasion, and respect. The strategy and insight Paul displayed were born of a lifetime of preparation, from the rigorous study under Gamaliel to the spiritual refinement in Arabia, and the patience cultivated during his early reception in Jerusalem. Each city, each synagogue, each conversation was an extension of the meticulous formation that had preceded his public ministry, and each response, whether acceptance or rejection, was an opportunity to refine his approach, deepen his message, and strengthen his resilience. The journey through Asia Minor, Greece, and Europe was marked not only by preaching and teaching but also by extraordinary events that reinforced the faith of the communities he served. In Ephesus, Paul's ministry demonstrated both spiritual authority and relational engagement, as miracles were reported and believers were empowered to take ownership of their faith communities. Even as opposition intensified, his efforts in establishing leaders, appointing elders, and providing guidance on practical and doctrinal matters ensured that the new churches would endure beyond his presence, forming a network of support and accountability across regions. The mission was never without cost. Paul and Barnabas faced stoning, imprisonment, and persistent threats to their safety. Yet these trials served to underscore the depth of their commitment and the power of the message they carried. Through adversity, Paul demonstrated an extraordinary ability to maintain focus on the larger vision, to nurture communities under duress, and to navigate the complexities of human response with discernment and compassion. His ability to adapt, whether engaging with Roman authorities, conversing with philosophers, or teaching newly converted households, highlighted the combination of intellect, spirituality, and emotional intelligence that would define his enduring impact on the spread of Christianity. Across these regions, the partnership between Paul and Barnabas exemplified the importance of collaboration, mentorship, and mutual encouragement in sustaining a transformative mission. Together, they navigated cultural boundaries, theological debates, and human opposition, translating the profound encounter on the road to Damascus into a lived ministry that spanned continents, touched countless lives, and laid the foundation for Christianity's expansion throughout the Greco-Roman world. The story of these journeys illustrates not only the courage and vision required to confront established norms, but also the strategic wisdom, relational sensitivity, and unwavering faith necessary to plant communities capable of enduring trials and sustaining the transformative power of the gospel. Through this extensive travel, Paul's influence extended far beyond the cities he visited. As letters, teachings, and the churches he established became conduits for a faith that transcended borders, cultures, and generations, demonstrating that the combination of personal transformation, disciplined preparation, and fearless action could reshape societies, inspire movements, and leave a legacy that would endure for centuries, a testament to the enduring power of conviction, resilience, and divine purpose working through a human life committed to service, truth, and the expansion of a vision far greater than any one individual. As Paul's journeys progressed, his ministry became increasingly marked by extraordinary events that drew attention not only to his words, but to the undeniable presence of divine power operating through him. Events that transcended cultural expectations and challenged the perceptions of both believers and skeptics alike. In Ephesus, a city renowned for its wealth, trade, and devotion to pagan deities, Paul spent 3 transformative years ministering to a community ripe for spiritual awakening. His presence there was characterized not only by teaching and pastoral care, but also by manifestations of a power that seemed to pierce through the ordinary fabric of daily life, as countless reports of healings and miraculous interventions spread throughout the city, attracting people from far and wide who sought relief from ailments, deliverance from oppression, and answers to questions that the conventional wisdom of the day could not provide. The miraculous healings Paul performed were not mere spectacles designed to impress onlookers. They were deeply relational acts that conveyed compassion, authority, and the transformative potential of faith. Individuals suffering from chronic illnesses, who had endured years of pain and social marginalization, were restored, often in ways that deeply impacted the communities around them. Fostering both and curiosity, these healings reinforced the credibility of Paul's message, demonstrating a tangible connection between the teachings he proclaimed and the practical, life-changing power he embodied. Each act of healing became a testimony, a living demonstration that the faith he preached was not abstract but a force capable of reshaping lives. Relationships and societal expectations. Equally remarkable were the exorcisms, where individuals believed to be afflicted by oppressive spiritual forces experienced liberation through Paul's intervention. In a culture steeped in superstition, ritual, and the pervasive belief in unseen powers, these acts both challenged conventional authority and confirmed the transformative reach of the Christian message. The deliverance of those who had been marginalized, feared, or ostracized illustrated a ministry concerned not only with doctrine but with tangible human liberation, reinforcing the notion that spiritual truth is inseparable from the well-being of the individual and the community. Through these acts, Paul demonstrated an integrated vision of ministry, one that addressed mind, body, and spirit, embodying a holistic approach to faith that emphasized practical application, empathy, and empowerment. Perhaps the most striking example of Paul's miraculous ministry occurred when a young man named Eutychus fell from a third-story window during one of Paul's extended sermons in Troas, a city where believers had gathered to hear the message of hope and salvation. The fall appeared fatal, a tragic interruption to a gathering imbued with spiritual expectation. Yet Paul's response exemplified both immediate action and profound authority. He descended, embraced the lifeless youth, and proclaimed life over him, reviving him before the astonished congregation. This event became emblematic of the radical nature of his ministry. It was not limited by human limitations or conventional understanding of possibility, but was imbued with a transformative power that challenged assumptions, ignited faith, and inspired devotion. The incident of Eutychus exemplified the intimate nature of Paul's engagement with those he served, highlighting a ministry that combined spiritual authority with personal care, demonstrating that miracles were as much about relationship, presence, and empathy as they were about divine intervention. Throughout these years, Paul's extraordinary acts attracted not only believers but also skeptics, critics, and those invested in maintaining existing religious or social hierarchies. Opposition arose from multiple fronts. From religious authorities who saw the growing Christian communities as a threat to established norms, to civic leaders concerned with potential unrest. Yet the very visibility of these miraculous acts often softened resistance, drawing attention to the transformative impact of his message on real people in real circumstances. Communities began to recognize that Paul's ministry was more than a series of sermons. It was a movement of tangible change, reshaping not only hearts and minds but also social dynamics, personal relationships, and communal identity. The healings, exorcisms, and restorations he performed acted as both catalyst and confirmation, proving that the faith he preached had the power to disrupt despair, foster hope, and establish enduring structures of spiritual and communal support. Even in the face of such extraordinary demonstrations, Paul maintained a careful balance, ensuring that the focus remained on the transformative message of the gospel rather than on spectacle or personal glorification. Each miracle was accompanied by teaching, discipleship, and the establishment of leadership within the newly formed communities, ensuring that the power witnessed was embedded within enduring structures of faith and practice. Paul's approach highlighted an understanding that miracles, while dramatic and awe-inspiring, were ultimately vehicles to deepen understanding, cultivate spiritual growth, and strengthen communal bonds. They were not ends in themselves, but signs pointing toward a broader vision of redemption, purpose, and the accessible presence of God in daily life. The cumulative impact of these extraordinary acts extended beyond individual cities or moments in time. They reverberated across the regions he traversed. Inspiring letters, visits, and follow-up ministries that ensured the lessons and experiences of those encounters were integrated into the fabric of Christian communities throughout Asia Minor, Greece, and beyond. His miracles created a legacy of expectation and faith, teaching early Christians that the divine was not distant or abstract, but actively involved in human affairs, capable of intervention, restoration, and empowerment. In reflecting on this period of Paul's ministry, it becomes evident that the extraordinary miracles he performed were inseparable from his personal transformation. Intellectual preparation and relational acumen, each act of healing, deliverance, and restoration exemplified a ministry deeply grounded in empathy, knowledge, and spiritual authority, demonstrating that the power of faith is most compelling when it is enacted with authenticity, courage, and a relentless commitment to serve others. Through these actions, Paul not only strengthened the communities he touched but also solidified his role as a transformative leader, one whose life continues to inspire generations with the profound possibility of change. The integration of faith and action, and the enduring impact of a ministry guided by divine purpose. Human compassion and unwavering resolve. Even as Paul found himself confined under house arrest in Rome, restricted in movement yet unbound in spirit, his ministry did not falter. Instead, it entered a profound new phase in which the written word became an instrument of influence, connection, and guidance that would extend far beyond the physical limitations of his imprisonment. The modest dwelling that served as both his residence and his place of ministry became a hub of intellectual and spiritual activity, a center from which he could continue shaping the early Christian movement, nurturing fledgling communities, and addressing practical and theological challenges with precision, care, and insight. Here, surrounded by a small circle of followers, visitors, and fellow believers, Paul engaged in an extraordinary act of leadership that relied on persuasion, reflection, and inspiration rather than physical presence, demonstrating that true ministry is not defined by mobility but by vision, conviction, and clarity of purpose. Within the walls of his Roman residence, Paul composed epistles that would become foundational texts for the growing Christian faith, tailoring each message to the particular needs, challenges, and questions of the communities he served. In Philippians, he conveyed encouragement and resilience, urging believers to rejoice in the Lord even amidst difficulty, to cultivate gentleness, and to practice gratitude and prayer as means of sustaining spiritual peace in the midst of uncertainty. His words were simultaneously pastoral and strategic, addressing the emotional and spiritual well-being of a community facing internal and external pressures while reinforcing the theological principles that would bind them together across distance and time. He reminded the Philippians that faith was a lived experience, demanding not only belief but active engagement with the principles of love, humility, and endurance, and that even in suffering, one could find purpose and connection to a larger divine narrative. In Colossians, Paul expanded on themes of spiritual maturity, urging believers to embody the fullness of faith in both thought and action, to resist false teachings, and to ground their lives in the principles of Christ-centered living. His letters were not abstract treatises but deeply practical guides, offering concrete advice on how communities could navigate interpersonal dynamics, ethical dilemmas, and the challenges of cultural assimilation in an increasingly complex and pluralistic society. He wrote with the precision of a scholar, the heart of a pastor, and the authority of one who had seen both the heights of spiritual revelation and the depths of human opposition, ensuring that his guidance was both credible and compelling. Each sentence was carefully calibrated to inspire reflection, encourage persistence, and convey the enduring presence of God's guidance, demonstrating that leadership in faith requires not only insight, but an ability to communicate it in ways that are accessible, relatable, and actionable. Perhaps most significantly, his letters address the organization and governance of the early church, offering guidance on the selection of leaders, the fostering of communal harmony, and the maintenance of doctrinal integrity. In 1 Timothy, Paul provided instructions that would shape the structure of Christian communities for generations, emphasizing the qualities necessary for those entrusted with leadership, the importance of mentorship, and the need to protect the community from teachings that might dilute or distort the core message. His advice was framed with both wisdom and foresight, reflecting a deep understanding of human nature. Organizational dynamics, and the necessity of embedding ethical and spiritual principles into institutional structures to ensure the durability and authenticity of the church's mission. Even under the constraints of house arrest, Paul remained actively engaged with the broader Christian world, welcoming visitors, corresponding with leaders in distant cities, and providing encouragement to communities facing persecution. Doctrinal confusion, or internal conflict. The physical boundaries of his confinement became a metaphorical amplification of his reach, as the letters he wrote circulated widely, serving as conduits for teaching, encouragement, and cohesion across vast geographical spaces. Through these communications, he demonstrated that spiritual authority is not dependent on mobility or spectacle, but on the clarity, consistency, and integrity of one's message and the relational trust cultivated with those who receive it. Paul's writings from this period also reveal a remarkable balance between hope and realism, exhortation and comfort, intellectual rigor and pastoral warmth. He acknowledged the realities of human struggle, the inevitability of opposition, and the persistence of error, yet he consistently pointed to a higher standard of truth, love, and faithfulness, offering communities a compass to navigate both internal and external challenges. In doing, he ensured that the early church could function not merely as a collection of isolated believers, but as a coherent, resilient network of communities capable of enduring trials, interpreting Scripture faithfully, and expanding the reach of the Christian message in a manner that was both principled and adaptable. Beyond theological instruction, Paul's letters conveyed a deeply personal element, offering glimpses into his own experiences, struggles, and reflections, which humanized the authority with which he wrote and strengthened the relational bond between him and his readers. He shared lessons learned through hardship, insights gained from divine revelation, and encouragement drawn from his unwavering commitment to the gospel, allowing readers to perceive him not only as a teacher but as a companion in their journey of faith, someone who understood their fears, rejoiced in their successes, and guided them through challenges with both wisdom and empathy. In essence, Paul's house arrest in Rome became a period of extraordinary productivity and influence, demonstrating that constraints need not limit the impact of a committed and visionary individual. Through the letters he penned, he established foundational principles of church organization, clarified essential doctrines, offered encouragement in adversity, and fostered enduring connections among disparate communities. His written ministry ensured that the growth of Christianity would continue, even in the absence of his physical presence, proving that leadership rooted in clarity of purpose, relational intelligence, and spiritual authority can transcend limitations, inspire lasting change, and leave a legacy of profound influence that extends far beyond immediate circumstances. Through these writings, Paul exemplified the enduring power of communication, mentorship, and faith-driven action, reinforcing that the seeds of transformation planted with care, thoughtfulness, and conviction can grow into a movement that shapes generations, sustains communities, and continues to illuminate the path of faith long after the original messenger has departed. From the earliest days of his ministry, it became increasingly clear that Paul's vision for Christianity extended far beyond the boundaries of his own people, a vision shaped by his unique background, rigorous education, and extraordinary personal transformation. Born Saul in Tarsus, a city alive with cultural intersections and philosophical discourse, and raised in the devout traditions of Jerusalem, Paul possessed a rare combination of Jewish learning, Greco-Roman sophistication, and an openness to ideas that transcended parochialism. This background, coupled with the radical encounter on the road to Damascus, catalyzed a transformation in which he could not only grasp the profound significance of Jesus' teachings but also perceive their universal applicability. Recognizing that the message of salvation, hope, and moral renewal was intended for all humanity, irrespective of cultural, ethnic, or social distinctions, Paul's approach to spreading Christianity was revolutionary in its inclusivity, challenging deeply entrenched social and religious boundaries that had previously confined spiritual discourse to a single ethnic group. In cities across Asia Minor, Greece, and later Europe, he encountered communities deeply divided along lines of religion, class, and heritage, yet he approached each with a vision that sought to unify rather than alienate. He taught that the transformative power of the gospel was not limited by ancestry or ritual observance, but was accessible to anyone willing to embrace its principles of faith, love, and obedience to God's will. This radical inclusivity reshaped the perception of Christianity from a sect within Judaism into a faith movement capable of bridging diverse populations, offering a moral and spiritual framework that resonated across cultural divides. One of the most profound aspects of Paul's strategy was his ability to communicate effectively within a variety of cultural contexts without compromising the essence of his message. When addressing Jewish audiences, he often referenced scripture, prophecies, and shared traditions, establishing common ground and demonstrating continuity with their heritage. In contrast, when speaking to Gentiles, particularly in Greek and Roman cities steeped in philosophy, mythology, and civic religion, he employed analogies, rhetoric, and cultural references that made the gospel intelligible and compelling without diluting its spiritual power. A notable example occurred in Athens at the Areopagus, where Paul confronted a society devoted to a multitude of gods and intellectual speculation. He skillfully referenced an altar to an unknown god as a point of connection, framing the message of Christ in terms that were both familiar and thought-provoking, thus opening a doorway for engagement and reflection. Paul's commitment to a universal gospel also had practical consequences for the structure and expansion of early Christian communities. He established churches in urban centers that were strategic not only for their population density, but also for their cultural influence, creating networks that could sustain growth and facilitate communication among believers of diverse backgrounds. In these communities, he emphasized principles of equality, moral integrity, and mutual support, articulating in Galatians 3:28 that there was neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, emphasizing that spiritual identity in Christ transcended all social distinctions. This insistence on inclusion not only strengthened the cohesion of early churches, but also fostered a vision of Christianity as a faith defined not by ethnicity or status, but by commitment to its teachings and the cultivation of virtues such as love, patience, and self-control. Moreover, Paul's letters reveal the intellectual sophistication with which he approached the task of expanding Christianity. He was acutely aware that the early church existed in a world shaped by complex social, philosophical, and political realities, and he addressed these dynamics with insight and nuance. By integrating elements of Greco-Roman rhetorical skill, Jewish exegetical tradition, and practical ethical guidance, Paul created writings that were at once doctrinally rigorous, culturally sensitive, and universally applicable. His epistles served not merely as letters of encouragement but as tools for education, cohesion, and the transmission of a coherent vision for a faith that could endure across time, geography, and demographic diversity. In addition, Paul's insistence on the gospel's accessibility challenged exclusionary tendencies that might have arisen within the early church, reinforcing the notion that divine grace was not earned through birthright, social status, or adherence to ritual alone, but was offered freely to those willing to embrace its ethical and spiritual demands. By advocating for gentle inclusion, Paul positioned Christianity to become a genuinely global faith, one capable of transcending parochialism, addressing universal human concerns, and providing a moral and spiritual compass that could guide communities across diverse cultures. This radical orientation toward universality set the stage for the subsequent missionary work of countless followers, laying a foundation for the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire and, eventually, the world. Paul's vision also intertwined with his emphasis on the transformative power of the Spirit in individual lives, emphasizing that faith was not a static identity but an ongoing process of renewal, moral growth, and aligned with divine purpose. This perspective reinforced the idea that anyone, regardless of background, could experience personal transformation and participate fully in the life of the Christian community. By promoting both spiritual empowerment and social inclusion, Paul created a model of faith that was both deeply personal and profoundly communal, demonstrating that the universal reach of Christianity depended on the interconnection of individual devotion, ethical living, and active engagement in supportive communities. Ultimately, Paul's insistence on the gospel for all people reshaped the trajectory of Christianity, converting it from a Jewish sect into a global movement capable of reaching the farthest corners of the Roman Empire and beyond. His legacy illustrates that faith becomes transformative not only when it speaks to shared human concerns, but also when it transcends boundaries, challenges prejudice, and offers a vision of unity grounded in spiritual truth, moral integrity, and compassionate action. Through his journeys, writings, and teachings, Paul established a model of inclusive, visionary leadership, demonstrating that the power of a message lies not merely in its content, but in its ability to bridge divides, inspire hearts, and create communities defined by love, justice, and the enduring pursuit of spiritual growth. In reflecting on Paul's work, one sees the profound impact of a leader who dared to envision a faith without boundaries, whose conviction, intellect, and courage transformed Christianity into a movement that continues to resonate, empower, and unite people across the globe centuries later. As we reach the conclusion of Paul's remarkable journey, it is impossible not to reflect on the extraordinary arc of his life, a life that began as Saul, a zealous persecutor of early Christians, and evolved into Paul, the apostle whose vision, courage, and unwavering faith transformed the landscape of Christianity forever. From his birth in the bustling, multicultural city of Tarsus, through his rigorous education under the esteemed teacher Gamaliel in Jerusalem, to his dramatic encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, Paul's story is one of profound transformation. resilience, and relentless pursuit of purpose. His early years, marked by strict adherence to Jewish law and fervent opposition to the fledgling Christian movement, set the stage for an equally powerful counterpoint, a life dedicated to spreading a message of inclusivity, grace, and spiritual renewal to all people, Jew and Gentile alike. Paul's ministry was not without immense challenges. He faced opposition, persecution, and even threats to his life. Yet these obstacles never deterred him. Whether enduring physical attacks, navigating cultural complexities across the Roman Empire, or experiencing the isolation of house arrest in Rome, Paul remained steadfast in his mission. He understood that true leadership in faith required courage not only to proclaim the gospel, but also to live it authentically, to guide others with wisdom and compassion, and to demonstrate that resilience in the face of adversity is as essential as knowledge and zeal. His ability to adapt his message to diverse audiences while maintaining its core truths exemplifies a rare blend of intellect, empathy, and strategic vision, qualities that ensured the enduring reach and relevance of his teachings. Through his missionary journeys, Paul planted churches in key cities across Asia Minor, Greece, and Europe, nurturing communities of believers, establishing leaders, and fostering networks that would endure long after his departure. He performed extraordinary acts that bore witness to his faith, from healing the sick to confronting spiritual opposition, and even raising a young man from the dead, each act reinforcing the transformative power of the gospel he preached. These miracles were not mere spectacles. They were living demonstrations of hope, compassion, and divine authority, affirming the message that the gospel was meant to change hearts, lives, and societies. Even under house arrest in Rome, Paul's impact did not diminish. Through his letters, epistles such as Philippians, Colossians, and 1 Timothy, he provided guidance on church organization, doctrinal clarity, and personal conduct, shaping communities and future generations with wisdom that transcended the constraints of time and space. His writings emphasized perseverance, ethical living, and communal harmony, reinforcing the notion that the true power of faith lies not only in spiritual experience, but also in the application of principles in everyday life. In these letters, one sees Paul's enduring commitment to teaching, mentoring, and sustaining the global Christian community, ensuring that even in captivity, he remained an active force for spiritual growth and unity. Paul's vision extended far beyond the confines of any single city or people. He saw Christianity not as a sect limited to one ethnic group, but as a universal faith capable of touching the hearts and minds of all humanity. His insistence on inclusivity, reflected in statements such as "there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free," reshaped the early church into a global movement founded on the principles of equality, love, and moral integrity. By bridging cultural, social, and religious divides, Paul laid the groundwork for Christianity's expansion across the Roman Empire and, ultimately, throughout the world, ensuring that the message of Christ would reach far beyond its original context and endure across generations. Ultimately, Paul's life demonstrates the transformative power of faith when paired with courage, intellect, and perseverance. His story challenges us to reflect on our own journeys, how we respond to moments of adversity, how we engage with diverse communities, and how we harness our gifts and convictions to make a lasting impact. Paul's legacy is not merely historical. It is a living testament to the potential of one person to change the course of human understanding, to inspire countless others, and to leave an enduring mark on the spiritual and ethical fabric of society. As we honor Paul's journey from a man blinded by zeal to a visionary leader whose faith illuminated the path for millions, we are reminded that transformation is possible, that perseverance yields fruit, and that true leadership is measured not by power or prestige, but by the depth of one's commitment to principles greater than oneself. His life invites us to act with courage, to embrace the transformative potential of our own experiences, and to extend compassion, guidance, and vision to those around us. Thank you so much for watching and taking this journey through the life of Paul with us. If you enjoyed this story, learned something new, or felt inspired, please remember to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more content that explores the lives of history's most remarkable figures. Your support helps us continue creating stories that inform, inspire, and connect us all. May Paul's journey inspire you to pursue your own path of purpose and faith. And as you reflect tonight, we wish you a peaceful and restful sleep. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with inspiration and hope.